Raya, thank you so much for welcoming us today. It's a pleasure to meet you. For the audience, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
So my name is Raya. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of School of Humanity.
That's fantastic. So what is School of Humanity in just a few words?
Yeah, so School of Humanity is an online high school with a really innovative learning model. At our school, our learners develop their skills, mindsets, and behaviors by tackling real-world challenges. We have a completely interdisciplinary curriculum.
Wow, so that seems disruptive. So what do you think about traditional education systems? What are your thoughts on, especially on high school, since you're mainly focusing on high school level? Yeah, what do you think? What are the biggest maybe gaps that you've been able to identify? What works and what maybe should be changed?
Yeah, so I think one of the big issues with the traditional high school system is there are not enough diversity of learning models out there to cater to different kinds of learners. So if you think about the school system around the world, whether you go to an IB school or an American school, chances are you're actually learning in very much the same way. The curriculum is divided into subjects. We have year groups. Learners go to school from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., right? So there's aspects of the education model that are very similar across the world in the mainstream education system. Whereas what we're trying to advocate for is that there are completely different ways of doing things. And for some learners, it might be that they go to school 2 or 3 times a week and have self-paced learning for the rest of the time. Or they experience a completely project-based curriculum rather than a knowledge-based curriculum. So I think while the current education system serves some people really well, it doesn't cater to everyone's needs around the world.
Yeah, and so basically you mentioned project-based learning. What else? Like, what is basically something that bothers you in the current education system? Maybe you can give a few examples and how to go around it.
Great question. So one of the things that really bothers me is this obsession with exams, standardized tests. Once again, they can be a valid metric of some skills and some abilities for some learners, but there are so many modalities of intelligence and abilities that we don't measure through the traditional test exams. Yet, in most schools and national education systems, they are the main criteria or the main metric of whether learning has happened. So that's one thing that I think is wildly problematic. I think the other is just the way we structure the learning experience. I mean, let's imagine a parallel example with the workforce. So imagine you went to work and you were in meetings hour after hour from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then when you got home, you had more work to do. I don't think that's a healthy environment for anyone to be productive, yet that's what we put our children through in the school system. So those are just 2 examples of things that bother me with the way we teach and learn.
And what about real life skill building? We often talk about how school could maybe better prepare you to real life. What do you think about this? Like, skills that we don't necessarily develop at school, at least right now in most current education systems. What do you think about this, and what are the most important skills to develop at this age, according to you?
So you raise a really important point, because what we need is not just innovation in how we learn, but what we learn.
Exactly.
Right? So the curriculum in most schools have stayed pretty much the same. We focus on subject knowledge, and there's some emphasis on skills and abilities, but it's very much not the focus. Whereas we know from reports from OECD, World Economic Forum, and many, many other thought leaders in the space that we're seeing the need for more digital skills, emotional intelligence, ability to collaborate across global networks, and yet those are usually the things that we focus on at extracurricular level in schools. They still haven't been brought into the core literacies to be just as important as English, physics, math, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing with skills is that you cannot teach them the same way we've been teaching subjects. You develop skills through doing, through practice, through application. So focusing on memorization of textbooks to take an exam is not the way to develop skills.
I agree with that. Now, how would you define potential? Because I think it's obviously something that is different for everyone. What is your definition, and what do you think is the most efficient way of increasing the potential of learners or students or young people?
Yeah. So with potential, there are 2 frameworks that are my favorite frameworks for defining human potential. One is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So Howard Gardner is an educational psychologist, and he basically proposed that there are different ways of being intelligent. So some people are kinesthetically intelligent, that means they're smart with their bodies. These might be dancers or athletes. Others might be intrapersonally intelligent.
That's the 9 type of intelligence. I know this framework.
Yeah. So the 9 types. So I think that's one really powerful framework that I wish was more mainstream, is that even if you're an athlete or you're just very sociable, that in itself is a measure of human potential. The other is a framework that the Japanese came up with called ikigai, the reason for being. Ikigai lies at the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you could get paid for. And at the very intersection of those 4 things, you have your purpose, your path to flourishing and self-actualization. And that too, I think, is a really interesting path to meeting human potential.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Now let's talk about School of Humanity. What is it exactly that you do? And maybe what is your solution to try to change a little bit the education space and disrupt it?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier we're an online high school,
Yes.
which we are, but we also do hybrid programs, one of which we host here at the Alpha Team Innovation Hub in partnership with the Alpha Team Education Foundation. And primarily there are 3 programs that we offer. We have an online high school program that's launching this fall. It's a 4-year full-time alternative high school. Yet we also do summer school and after-school programs for learners around the world. Now, the key things all of our programs have in common is at their core, we follow something called challenge-based learning. So instead of courses, learners embark on challenges. An example of a challenge could be sustainable cities or creating virtual worlds. And you develop your skills, your knowledge, your dispositions by tackling these challenges. Throughout the journey, learners also participate in what we call flourishing sessions. This is where they go inwards to find meaning and purpose and self-awareness. And they also receive mentorship from industry experts as they embark on the challenges.
So basically all the teachers are not really teachers, they're facilitators, they're mentors, right? So what is their approach? How do they make sure that, they keep the learners intrinsically motivated? And it's also especially because it's online, right? It's only online. So how do you make sure that you have the learners motivated and passionate about what they do?
Great question. So we find that when learning is driven by bettering the world in challenge-based learning, it's one of the most powerful motivators. It's so much more exciting for learners to learn in order to create a better future than to take an arbitrary test. So we really find that drives them very well. The other thing that is really unique about our approach from an educator's perspective is we split up the role of the educator into 5 or 6 different roles. So we have learning designers that design the learning journeys and the curriculum. We have learning facilitators that facilitate the journeys and help customize it to each learners. We have mentors. These are industry experts that guide learners along the way. We have learning administrators that support with coordinating, making sure everyone has access to the necessary platforms, the admin side of things. So really traditionally in schools, teachers do all of the above, and that can be extremely overwhelming. It also means that they might not be focusing on the things they're particularly good at. Whereas at School of Humanity, our educators have different roles depending on what it is that their strongest skill set lies in.
That makes sense. And how many students do you have on average in each session? I mean, in each classroom, if I can call them classrooms.
So our cohorts usually are around 15 learners. Sometimes they're a bit more. And in mentorship sessions, they're 3 to 4. So it really ranges depending on the type of sessions. We also do a lot of one-on-one with our learners. Our average ratio is 8 to 1 from learners to facilitators.
Now, one strong point of School of Humanity, from my perspective, is that you don't only focus on skills, which is obviously really important, and knowledge, but you focus also on mindsets, on behaviors. Can you please elaborate on that? Why is it important, and how exactly do you do it?
So for example, and mindset that we focus on, in addition to dozens of others, is the growth mindset, right? Being able to recognize that you can always improve, you can always be better. So that's one mindset that we know you cannot have learning without that mindset being in place. Another mindset could be something like being able to be rationally optimistic, and which is a really critical mindset if you're going to contribute to human progress. So I think through these examples, you can see why they're so important. And for us, they're not supplementary. They are at the core just as important as numeracy skills or writing skills, because if we're truly going to prepare young minds for the future, these mindsets are critical not just for the workforce that they're going into, but also in their personal lives.
Yeah, I think that having a strong set of values really help you to understand yourself, understand maybe the world better, and what you want to do in life. And then, I mean, everyone has its own direction, but if you have a strong set of values, you mentioned growth mindset, but I think mindfulness is really important as well. There's so many, and yeah, I personally think that there's not enough of that in current schools. So that's fantastic. Now, what about the reach of School of Humanity? Where exactly do you have learners? Like where are they located? What about facilitators? How many countries do you cover, basically?
Yeah, so we've had learners participate in our programs. We've had over 100 learners from over 25 countries across 5 continents participating in the different programs. And we also do have quite a few learners coming from the United Arab Emirates, where we have started piloting hybrid programs. And our facilitators and mentors as well come from around the world. The beauty of it is how global it is. When we went out to do this, we didn't think that one of the number one, let's say, selling points for the learners would turn out to be the fact that they get to work with learners from around the world and make friends from learners around the world. So that's been really nice.
That makes sense. What happens in a typical learning session? What are the different formats that you may have? And you mentioned project-based learning, so I imagine portfolios. What are some type of projects that learners work on?
So one of the rules that we have is we never lecture at learners. In fact, our facilitators aren't allowed to talk at the learners for more than 10 to 15 minutes at a time. And so instead, what we have is we have a lot of activities, discussions, exercises, brainstorming sessions. So we think that whatever is content focused that involves learners consuming information can be done before the sessions. So that's where it happens on the online platform. And when they come into sessions, that's a time to apply what they've learned in a self-paced way and collaborate and analyze and critically reflect and so on. So our sessions are very much based on that. And usually after a session, learners then apply it further in the form of an assessment to validate and credential the fact that they've learned or gained certain skills, mindsets, behaviors during the session. And in terms of the kinds of projects, so there's project-based learning and then there's challenge-based learning, right? So challenge-based learning is what we follow, which is based on challenges. And usually the types of projects are solutions that learners come up with to certain challenges tagged to the Sustainable Development Goals. What I always emphasize is that it's not an entrepreneurship program. This means some of the solutions can be policy related, artistic, they can be focused on design and engineering or tech solutions. It's really a range of angles that learners choose to take for their projects to the challenges.
That makes sense. So basically, what kind of recognition does School of Humanity get? Does that replace typical high school? Is it still like an extracurricular program? Where are you at exactly?
Yeah, so our summer and after school programs are typically for learners who want to treat it as an extracurricular program. They typically graduate from the program with a portfolio of projects, certifications for any of the pathways that they've completed and so forth. However, this fall we are launching the 4-year high school. We are a licensed American high school and we are going through the international accreditation process with the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. So our ultimate mission and vision is really centered around learners being able to enroll in School of Humanity full-time as a full alternative and graduate with a recognized diploma for their work.
So that's an ongoing process, basically. It's like transition phase, right?
Exactly, We're actually in the process of interviewing the first candidates for the high school right now, which is really exciting.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Okay, now what future do you envision for both the public sector and private schools? How do you think we can, accelerate that transition, and how feasible is that?
So one of the exciting trends that we're seeing in the MENA region is this trend of the public sector contracting the private sector to run its public education. It's very similar to the privatization of the space industry in the United States, where NASA and SpaceX will collaborate together, and it's a far more efficient approach to innovation in that sector, right? So we're seeing that similar parallel here. Now, I think one of the major changes we need to see is in regulations around education. Typically, a lot of governments around the world have a very rigid definition of what's considered a school. They mandate certain curriculum areas that might be a bit outdated, or they won't attest types of transcripts that are skill-based or portfolio-based transcripts. So I think all of those regulations need to change to allow for new models of education to be recognized and equally credible as the traditional institutions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, what do students do after, maybe during and after School of Humanity? Do they speak on stages? Do they work with interesting companies? What do they do basically?
Well, it varies from learner to learner. I think what the post-School of Humanity things that have excited me the most is when they continue to keep in touch and collaborate with one another. So we had one learner go about to launch a podcast with some of the other learners that she worked with. A lot of them we do our best to get them further exposure opportunities, whether it's speaking on stages or internships. We've had learners leverage the learning experience to apply to really amazing universities and get accepted. So it really varies from learners to learners, and what's also really fun is when we see them come back.
Of course,
and come back through the programs and continue to advance through the curriculum.
So you're also building a community where, it's not just a few months, a few years in your life. You're basically, you belong, and makes sense. Now, we've mentioned that, but what is School of Humanity impact? So we mentioned the qualitative impact a lot. Maybe you can sum this up and talk about numbers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's multiple layers through which we measure the outcomes. One is the learning outcomes, right? So the skills, the mindsets, the knowledge they're gaining. We do lots of micro-assessments. We do lots of project-based assessments, right, to constantly be evaluating whether outcomes are being met. So one level is the learning outcomes. The other is the learning experience. So constantly serving learners, facilitators, families, parents about whether they love learning at School of Humanity or other dimensions of the experience in terms of their interactions with facilitators and mentors. And then the third metric, let's say, that excites me the most is the impact the learners go on to have on the world. So whether it's directly through the projects that they worked with us on, or it's to what they go on to do because they now have been equipped with all of these new mindsets and tools to contribute to human progress. So I would say those are three ways we quantitatively measure our impact.
That makes sense.